Guitar Collector Guy presents Telecaster Build Part 2. In Part 1, I built out the wiring harness for this guitar. Now I'm actually assembling the entire guitar. Assembling the control panel. So this is the wiring harness that I built in Part 1 of this video series. And I used this template for a complete wiring harness that I had gotten one time, and I hung on to it because I knew that I would build out wiring harnesses, and I like having the extra surface. I think it's more stable then and stuff like that than trying to build it on the back of the control panel cover. And so now I'm basically taking it out of the harness jig that I had and mounting it inside of the control panel. I also got some really cool kind of bullet type or rounded dome knobs for this that I think that they look pretty cool. And so just kind of setting up and assembling this so I can go ahead and put it in the guitar. So the two dome knobs have little set screws with standard screws in them, so a slotted screw. So I loosen them all the way, and then they slide easily then onto the post, and then you just basically tighten the screw once it's on there. Assemble and install the input jack. So this is the wiring diagram that I used for basically creating the wiring harness that I'm installing in this guitar. You can see the two leads that go to the output jack. So the ground is going to go to the ring, and then in this case the white wire is going to go to the tip, and the diagram actually matches what the output jack looks like in this. And so if you just follow along with the diagram, it's pretty easy to solder the two leads that I have onto the jack itself. So I did the last video on building out the wiring harness, but I never really actually talked about soldering. I'm not going to give you a primer on soldering, but first of all, this is a variable temperature solder. You really don't, soldering iron, you really don't have to use that. That's a little bit higher end. I paid like 80 bucks for this. To be honest with you, you can buy really good soldering irons for like 10 bucks on Amazon. They're not variable speed, you just plug them in. And I've used them for years doing this type of work. But back to soldering. So I've got the wire stuck through the hole. Actually, I don't here, sorry. But I am just kind of priming the hole with solder so I can heat it up and then, put the wire through it. It's I'm not actually, I'm heating up the actual metal of the input jack, and then I'm flowing the solder onto it. So you're not actually heating the solder on the soldering iron. It's all about heating the item that you're soldering and then touching the solder to that and letting it flow out. So a few other things to think about is one, when you're done, you probably shouldn't have holes, air bubbles, and things like that. And the solder should be really nice and smooth and bright in color. If it's not, then potentially you're running into possibly having what's called a cold solder joint, and it won't actually conduct electricity or won't perform at an optimum level. So the next step is to slide the input jack from inside the body through the hole to the outside. And there'll be a little metal panel with a hole in it that you have to kind of feed the impact jack into. So installing the input jack for someone who has big potato fingers like me can be a little bit of a challenge. It's kind of made for someone with smaller diameter fingers. So you feed the impact jack or input jack through the tunnel and through this little metal plate with a hole in it the size of the throat of the input jack. Slide it through and then put the input jack cup over the top of it on the outside, and you'll have then threads from the input jack itself exposed, and then you basically put a nut on that. Try to get the nut started on the threads. And then, I use a nut driver like this and, just kind of tighten it. I was having problems here because of my big old fingers, not necessarily getting it started. And so I finally had to turn the guitar body up towards me so I could have better sight as to what I was doing. And I finally got it started and tightened down. If you like this video, please click on like, subscribe, and notify. Soldering the ground clip onto the ground wire. So what I'm showing you right now on the screen is pretty much in the category of how not to do this. In the future, I would take a small set of vice grips or something, clamp down on the actual ground lug, and then I would have a free hand and be able to easily connect the wire to it and then heat up the clip itself and get solder to flow onto it. Otherwise, you do what I'm doing right now, which is kind of a pain, and I eventually did get it to work, but to be honest with you, I actually edited out a lot of times where I was messing up and it wasn't working, and I could have cut the job down into a fraction of the time if I just used something to hold the clip. Install the pickups. Again, here's the template wiring diagram of what I used to basically create the wiring harness. Let's focus on the neck pickup first. You can see the white lead coming off of it, connecting to the far left top lug of the three-way switch, and then the ground going over to the volume pot onto the back of the pot itself. The bridge pickup now, the yellow wire goes to the bottom all the way to the right lug, and then the black wire also goes to the back of the volume pot soldered to it. So prior, I had actually put a lot of solder on the back of the volume, and I connected that ground wire that you see there with the anticipation that I'd have two wires in the future to heat up that solder and connect them. And then that's what I basically do in this case. So I installed the neck pickup first. I got this really cool set of 51 no-caster pickups. I had a purpose when I got them. I knew that I'd want to put them in maybe one of the existing Telecasters I have or a build in the future. I had done a lot of research on, and I've always had interest in having a Telecaster as a jazz guitar. And there are a few artists that are doing this right now that it's just kind of cool and appeals to me. And I was looking at what are supposedly the best pickups to use for jazz, and this set of pickups continuously came up. And if you shop around online, you can pick them up for a really good deal of about 150 some odd dollars, but more likely I think it's like $219. So I put in the neck pickup first, slide the wires through the channel. Also too, if you look at this body of this guitar, it's designed where it can actually handle the traditional neck pickup like this, or actually a humbucker. So it's a nice option to have. I didn't want to go with a humbucker in this case. I wanted to use these pickups, so that's what I'm going to do. So now I insert the bridge pickup, and I'm sliding then the wires through the channel. It's a little more difficult for me at this point. Again, with the big old potato fingers and stuff, but I finally get it started and through, and I'm able to grab it out of the control panel channel. So now, following the wiring diagram that I showed earlier, I'm going to take the white wire coming off of the neck pickup, put it on the very first lug at the top of the three-way switch. And here I am soldering it in place. So next I'm going to take the yellow wire off of the bridge pickup. I had to kind of move some of the wires away to gain access to the first all the way to the right lug on the three-way switch, and there I'm sliding the wire in, and you go ahead and have some solder flow on to the lug to hold the wire in place. So next, this isn't really part of quote-unquote installing the pickups, but I took the ground wire on the control panel that would normally go through a channel and come up underneath the bridge. This one, for some reason, this body didn't have that channel, and so I had to put a lug on and screw it into the hole underneath the control panel like you just saw that I did. But now I'm going to take the two black wires that are left from both the bridge and the neck pickups, and I'm going to twist them together, and I'm going to heat up after I trim off the excess wire on each of the two switch lugs that I just installed from the pickups. But I'm going to twist the two wires together, heat up the big gob of solder that I have on the back of the volume pot, and then solder those two wires in place, and I'll be done then at that point installing the two pickups. Next, I put the kind of excess wire down into the channel, tucked away, and then I set the control panel in place, but I'm not putting the screws in yet. I could have, but I just wanted access in case I needed to fix something or correct something. Install the bridge assembly. So I went with a traditional vintage 3-saddle brass bridge. So now I'm installing the screws in place that will hold the pickup in. There are 3 screws, and you put these little rubber kind of tubing over the back of them and holds it in place. And then now I kind of line it up and start feeding the screws through the 3 holes on the pickup itself, and start to kind of tighten it down before I then set the bridge in place and kind of aligning all the holes and everything. So now I get the 4 screws that hold, and one thing that I didn't include, and I'm sorry, I kind of preach about this, I put some beeswax on the screws off camera before putting them in, but now I'm going ahead and tightening the 4 screws down and putting the bridge in place, and then checking afterwards to make sure that the 6 holes for the strings are lining up just perfectly. Install the pickguard. So there are 2 different types of pickguards. You'll see a reference to a 5-hole pickguard for a Telecaster and one for an 8-hole. And the newer model Telecasters have 8 holes. That's what this is. It's easy enough to make sure that you're getting the right pickguard. Basically just count the holes so you know which one you need to order for the body that you're replacing the pickguard on. So right here I'm also putting the surgical tubing and the 2 screws in for the front pickguard, or for the neck pickup, and starting that, getting it started, and then I will drop the pickguard in place after that and put the 8 screws in and tighten it down. First test of electronics. You don't need to have strings installed or even a neck to test to see if the electronics are working. I have the body plugged in at this point, and I'm just touching each of the pull pieces on the pickups. And if I hear an audible click in the amplifier, there's a pretty good chance that things are wired properly and working. Install the control panel. So this is actually a fairly easy step. I'm just installing the 2 screws for the control panel and tightening it down. And now I've pretty much finished the assembly of the body for the guitar, and the next step is I'm going to install the neck. Install the neck. So installing the neck on the guitar is pretty easy. One thing that you didn't see here is with the guitar flipped over is you kind of pivot the neck into the body of the guitar, and it should be a pretty good, fairly tight fit. Then I turned it over and I put the neck plate on. I'm right now, in this case, you can actually see me putting some beeswax on the 4 bolts or screws. They call them bolts, but they're actually big screws. And then I put them in kind of how you would change a tire on your car. Basically tightening is I hand put them in, make sure that they're actually aligned with the holes that are pre-drilled in the neck. If you actually get a neck, and the next Telecaster I get actually doesn't have the holes drilled, and I'll actually show you how to do that and how to do your pilot holes and stuff like that. But in this case, I put them in, I kind of started hand tightening, and then I tighten the screws. I don't use a power drill ever. I use a hand screwdriver, and I am tightening screws across from each other, and I kind of do this consistently as a pattern. So I'm doing the top left corner and what's viewed, and now I'm dropping down to the bottom right. I realize you can't see me because of my big meat hooks, but that's what I'm doing. I'm now doing the bottom left hand corner, and then next I'm going to do the top right hand corner, and I just keep on doing that until it is hand tightened and secured to the body of the guitar. Install the tuners. You may have heard me talk before about these new vintage style tuners that Fender has. The most important thing is the low E and high E tuners are actually different. They have this little furrowed border that comes down. So just make sure that when you're installing that you're putting the right tuner in the right place. It's the only thing that you really have to worry about. These are great. This is a modern 9.5 radius neck, C-shaped. And then if you flip over the neck, there's actually for each tuner the 2 little holes for the traditional factory supplied tuners. These are kind of a really nice direct replacement for those, so you don't have to put a bushing into the neck or anything like that. And you know, each of the tuners has the 2 little pegs just like the factory tuners, but it gives it that really cool traditional look. And I love the slotted tuners because they're almost like having locking tuners, and it makes it really simple to change strings and so on. And so and they're also about half the price, well, not really, maybe about 2/3 the price of Fender locking tuners, which are actually really good tuners as well. So like I said, the low E and the high E tuners are different. So you can see in this case, I'm actually installing them first. They have the little kind of molding that comes off of them. And then the rest of the tuners are all kind of interchangeable. The forward, you can just put them in basically anywhere. They're all the same height and the same shape. So that's how they fit. install and tune strings. I sped this up so we can kind of get through it. There isn't something or a lot of detail, so I'm just feeding the 6 strings, starting with a low E through the back and up through the bridge, and then I go through and basically lock them down in the tuners and tighten it down. And then it's really important, I've said this before in other videos, we're going to be doing some testing of the guitar. We're going to be doing testing on the neck relief, which you don't really have to worry about it being tuned, but it helps. But it does have to be spot on tuned to do things like checking your string height as well as the intonation of the guitar. And so really important to install your strings, stretch them out really good. You know, basically each string, go back and forth. To be honest with you, anywhere from 2 to 3 times, really good solid, stretching. So it kind of tightens everything on either end, and it'll make your guitar stay in tune easier and longer. Measure the truss rod relief. So the relief in the neck is basically a term that describes the amount the neck is actually bowed. And so really easy way of testing is put a capo at the first fret and then hold down. I've heard different things. Hold on the last fret. I've also heard hold down where the neck basically connects to the guitar. And then I use a .006 feeler gauge at the 6th fret, and I should be able to slide it in with just almost touching the bottom of the string and the top of the fret, but clearing. We're not going to cover adjusting the truss rod in this because oddly enough the guitar neck was perfect. Measure and adjust string height. Measuring string height is a pretty easy thing to do. It's just really important to make sure that the guitar is tuned properly. You also want to put the guitar in the playing position, and then you're looking for measurements at the 12th fret. String height is usually, well, not usually, is always a personal preference. I like my action low medium, and so I set it at 1.25 for the 3 high strings and 1.5 at the 3 low strings. And basically what I do is I'm actually using a Music Nomad string gauge. I like it because it's a black gauge with white print, and it's just much easier for me to use on the neck. And I'm measuring and then adjusting the saddles as best I can to get it where the measurement is just below the string itself. And I do that for all 6 strings. And the great thing is, if I do that, it'll pretty much set the strings then to follow the radius of the neck. Retune again. So I'm just kind of re-emphasizing the importance of, I just basically set the string height on everything, kind of stretching the strings again, but I'm also then going through and tuning it up, the guitar spot on, not flat, not sharp, spot on what it's supposed to be, E, A, D, G, B, E, and making sure that when I then check for intonation, and intonation to me is basically as you depressed, play the open string or at the 12th fret, they should be the same note. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge when you do the 3-barrel Telecaster bridge because you have 2 strings on the same barrel. And so you kind of have to get a happy medium between those 2 strings where, like with a 6 saddle bridge, you can actually intonate specifically to each string. But here I am, I'm tuning, making sure the guitar is really, really spot on, properly tuned before I go on to setting intonation or measuring and setting intonation. Measure and adjust intonation. So I talked about intonation a little bit before. Here I'm finishing up my tuning, and then now I'm going to depress 1 string at a time. I first check the tuning of the open string, and then I check the tuning of the 12th string. Rule of thumb is if it's flat when you depress the 12th, but the string itself is spot on. Flat, I always remember flat equals forward on the saddle. Sharp equals back. I just remember the FF part, and it helps me remember. So I do this for each of them. I try to get them as close as I possibly can. I remember you've got 2 strings on each barrel, so you're going to have to get kind of a happy medium between the 2. You might end up being a little bit sharp and a little bit flat on the 2 strings, just kind of in the middle, but it's going to be pretty damn close. And I do this for each of the strings as I'm going through. final view of the guitar. So this guitar to me is probably one of my favorite builds. It sounds beautiful, it looks gorgeous, and it kind of has a mix of the retro, but it also has some of the modern, meaning that it has a modern neck with an easily accessible truss rod, so I don't have to take the neck off to adjust the truss rod if I need. I can actually just go up to the headstock, and adjust the truss rod there. It looks like an early model guitar. It's gonna have this one already. It does basically have the 51 Nocaster pickups in it, which are wired to the exact specifications of the original kind of Nocaster pickups in 1951. And I'm right now, you can't hear it, but I've got it plugged in and I'm just doing my first initial test through an amplifier and really, really happy with what's happening. So, that's it for this. Thank you for viewing the video. Please stay tuned for part 3 of this, which is basically giving it a run through, playing it on an amp. If you like this video, please click on like, subscribe, and notify.